Jim, it's February again, and typical February we had rain, mild temperatures 2 days ago, and last night was probably the first two-dog night of the winter.
And a two-dog night is
when you have two dogs on the bed, and I only own one dog, so it was a chilly night. Yeah. But this time of year, we start to think of something that goes on every year in Vermont. Very important.
Yeah. Mud season.
Mud season? Yeah.
And sugaring season.
Sugaring season.
We have 6 seasons in Vermont. The rest of the world has 4. Yeah, and let's talk about what's going to be this for sugar season this year. On March the 24th, that's a Sunday, we're going to have 15 sugar houses open to the public. They're all welcome to come and see how syrup is made, Vermont's most famous product. And the 15 sugar houses run from Dorset to Reedsboro. Dorset, Shasbury, Arlington, Bennington, and over to Reedsboro, Manchester. So it's a good opportunity, and that'll be March 24th, and closer to that date, there'll be ads in the paper to say which sugar houses they are that will be open, or they can go to the chamber and pick up a brochure.
And your predictions for the sugaring season?
Absolutely. We're going to have one.
Going to have one. Okay.
Well, yeah, it's easy. What they say about the weather in Vermont, it's easy to predict. It's impossible to predict accurately.
Okay.
So we'll have a sugaring season, and we hope it's great.
Well, here, with a little extra time in the winter, I've been looking at a lot of old logging equipment. And of course, when logging first started around here, things were a lot different than they are today. And one thing that was always used to full advantage then, and it still is to some today, is gravity.
Gravity's free.
Gravity
always works.
Yeah. And everything was figured out to go downhill in some manner because it didn't have the power and things. And originally, I guess horses, oxen, mules, they did the majority of the work, and it was not uncommon.
Did you mention water too?
Well, and water. They worked with the water, and water definitely follows gravity. And that was a way of taking a heavier load, a tree, a log, or whatever, and transporting it. And that was done from high water in the spring, but it seemed to almost like divide in Vermont where it went. It seemed to be big east of the Green Mountains and over into the Connecticut River Valley, but not much on the...
yeah, well, we didn't have that major highway that they had. The Connecticut River was the major highway, and that's probably, we didn't have one of those over here. We didn't, our rivers were smaller, and I guess our water stays underground over here, maybe.
Well, all the little feeder streams, sometimes they could be dammed up to get a reservoir of water to let go at one time and take it down.
Bigger, yeah.
Or wait till, of course, in the springtime, the wood would be piled on the sides of the streams. And I've had Scott Mayer told me, and I think you said that you, Chris Weezy, you that way up in the headwaters of the Windhall River, there's...
Yeah, Chris was always going to take me up there and show me that thing, because I couldn't believe it. And he said, I'll show you the smallest brook and what they used to dam it up and have a lot of water supply and float what they could down till the water ran out, and then dam it up. It will still be dammed up, but wait again for another charge to fill up the highway, and then float it, roll it down again.
But prior to the Industrial Revolution and things, water was the means of transportation. That was...
And power. Mostly.
And power.
And power, right. So.
But the canals in New York State, Champlain Barge Canal and everything constructed, and it was huge, the amount of commerce that went through with the water. Well, originally here in Vermont, it was softwood, spruce, fir, and then pine and things that were the log drives mostly that went to the sawmills, and it seemed to be that was what was in demand and what was usable then, whereas the hardwood, which it's almost turned around now, our real values into hardwood. Its main use was only, again, with the Industrial Revolution right around that time for a while, until it got replaced with petroleum and things, was charcoal. And just huge trees were just cut and burned for charcoal. And that didn't require much transportation as far as the wood went. And once it was in a charcoal form, it was probably 1/10 of the weight or less. Well, a big change came when machinery started. And this book here, Endless Tracks in the Woods, was the first track laying vehicles that people started coming up with, and the first ones were steam powered. First steam engines, of course, everything was stationary, and then someone tried to figure out how to move this, and where they could go on their own wherever they wanted to. And they were extremely big, clumsy, awkward things. They were fed with wood for a while, then they were fed with coal. What few were still operating, World War I time, I guess, went back to wood because coal was needed for the war effort. So these machines were slow to come about. They were expensive to operate, hard to get used to. There's a lot of resistance from people to use them, but they did finally take hold, which is obvious today.
Another thing, speaking of steam engines, we know where there's one left in the woods.
Yeah, well, those that were in the woods, a lot of them back, is that it was much more common in those days that you took the mill to the woods rather than you took the wood to the mills, because transportation was not good. In 1900, what was there for roads? I mean, it was a wagon track, a horse path, and when you started trying to take several tons of weight along a non-existent road with not much of a vehicle of any kind, it didn't go very well at all. So it was a lot easier to saw timber close to where it was harvested, and then you weren't going through the process of having to move a bigger weight whole log, and plus all the waste material of the slab wood, the bark, the sawdust from being cut along with it. So you'd ended up just transporting the actual usable wood itself, which probably might have been approaching 1/2 the weight, because it would have dried some and everything else. So those changes came about, but these first track laying machines, and the person that got the idea was from watching a horse on a treadmill, and he was thinking of how the power was being transferred there and stuff, and say if we could do that in reverse and transfer the power to an endless track that would just keep crawling, eventually crawler tractor, and they did that up in Maine. I think one of the most used things in the Northeast that I understand was the Lombard log hauler. Alvin Orlando Lombard was born in 1856 in Springfield, Penobscot County, Maine. Growing up on a family farm, he demonstrated an ability for labor-saving mechanical devices, including a water-powered butter churn. His early manhood was spent working various jobs in and about the Penobscot River lumber mills. Lombard became a self-taught millwright, and prior to 1900, he had invented several machines for use in the wood products industry. He always considered his invention of an automatic control for water-driven turbines to be his most important contribution to industry. Among his inventions was a machine for removing bark from pulpwood logs and an apparatus for removing knots and sawdust from wood chips in paper mills. So he had done a lot of things with the wood industry. And then he talked about the number of animals required by the lumber firm every winter, and how many horses had to be destroyed after being injured and everything. So he thought that he could adapt something to that. And he came up with a wooden model of his log hauler. And the outline was remarkably similar to a railroad locomotive with a cab mounted behind a horizontal boiler. The front of the log hauler rested on sled runners. The remarkable feature of this model was the drive mechanism mounted beneath the rear portion of the machine. Power was to be applied through a pair of endless tracks. Johnson Woodbury's horsepower treadmill had found an application to the lumber industry. Lawrence and his partners pronounced the model workable. Lombard was encouraged to develop a full-scale working model. He arranged with the Waterville Iron Works and built the first Lombard log hauler, and his application for patent was filed November 9, 1900. The first log hauler was named Mary Ann. It was put in operation Thanksgiving Day, 1900. The pistons on the engine worked up and down, and they worked in unison. The result was that Mary Ann hopped up and down and danced in the snow but got nowhere. This was corrected by making the pistons work on an alternating action, and Mary Ann then pulled like a 20-mule team. There were the steering mechanism on the front. Originally, the person that steered the machine sat out there and actually cranked the wheel to turn things. This was pretty brutal in the wintertime with all the snow and ice and stuff blowing. Well, eventually a little cab was built and there were different conveniences that were done. But this probably saved the lives of many horses. The teams ahead of a wagon, or more apt to be a sled or a hitch, coming downhill on an ice road, if they couldn't stay ahead of the load, the teamster could jump off, but the horses couldn't, and they were just run over and crushed by the logs. And that was a very, very common happening.
I'm sure you've heard of it, but I know two places that are called Dead Horse Hill, too.
Yes, yep, and the Kelly Stand Road.
Well, I was thinking of one in Reedsboro and one up around Stowe.
Yep.
But I'm sure they're all over, because wherever the horses were in the wintertime coming down an icy slope, and they were made icy on purpose to...
Yeah, everything was done to reduce friction to make things move easier.
And first you wanted a frictionless surface, and then you wanted to slow it down after that with the... And we were talking earlier about the chains.
The rubbler
chains, yeah.
And not many people today know what a rubbler chain is.
And if we were thinking a little ahead, we could show them right now, because you have one and I have one. And that's...
But it really was just a piece of chain. Usually it was homemade in a blacksmith shop in a very irregular size and shape, and it had one hook. Usually it was one hook on it on one end, and it was made to wrap around the runners of a sled. So would create friction.
Yeah.
And when you know you found a rubbler chain when you see the links, and there'll be a lot of flat spots worn on them. Other things were they'd spread hay on downgrades and places. But when it started to run away, many tons of wood, they'd say that horses could take on the level or slightly downhill. A team or two of horses could move 10,000 feet of logs. There's just some huge loads that are shown. But then when you take around and have to go uphill with it, they were lucky if they could handle 1,000 feet. And Vermont has a lot of ups and downs. It depends which way you're going on them, but it's very hard to go everywhere.
Sure, if you were a horse, you knew, yeah, both of them.
But there were some other machinery companies that were known, probably had some things in the area, were the Best and the Holt. The Holt Tractor Company, they produced things from 1904 to 1925, and the C.L. Best Traction Company from 1913 into the 30s. An interesting thing I thought was that the White Sewing Machine Company became the Cleveland Tractor Company. And the Cleveland Tractor Company made the Cle-Trac, and that's a name I always heard around here a lot. And the Cle-Trac crawler tractors were made from 1916 to 1945. And at that time, then, Cle-Trac was sold to the Oliver Tractor Company. And they were known as the Oliver Cle-Trac. And I think that was in the designation of the numbers. I think one of the models I can remember was, I think, an OC3, and that was probably Oliver Cle-Trac, number 3.
Well, not more than a mile from here is Colonel Ayers' house, and Colonel Ayers used to gather syrup with his Cle-Trac, pulling a storage tank behind it. It was a narrow, very high tractor, bulldozer, very narrow tracks, and sat high, but tiny when you think of crawlers.
Some of these are very, very small in size and weight. I think some of them only weighed like about 1,000 pounds. They don't look much bigger than today's lawn and garden tractor. But they worked. Orla Reed in South Dorset had a sawmill in World War II. I think he cut a lot of items for the military, just what they were, and I'm not sure, but he used an Oliver Cle-Trac crawler a lot. And one big advantage that the Cle-Trac had is what is known as planetary steering. And on the majority of crawlers, even many of them today, if you want to change directions, you pull on a braking lever that disengages the drive to one side and applies a brake. So then just one side of the machine is driving, and that will tend to push around and turn, all the while dragging the other track, which is increasing the friction and the power needed to make the turn. Where with the planetary steering, that would alter the speed of the tracks, so that if it was being increased on one side, that side would gain and you'd start to turn the other direction. And that's on the majority of all the new equipment today, I think, pretty much has that. But it's been a long time in coming, and Cle-Trac had it way in advance of everybody else. And it's one of the things that they like to have it. The other thing in the Cle-Trac too, there's some pictures showing a high final drive output into the track assembly, just like the Caterpillar tractors of today have. Many of them are driven in that manner, and it saves some, I think, internal gears. It keeps it up out of the grit of the soils and things like that. Well, the Cle-Trac still showed that years ago. Another thing that used to have, that when logging became mechanized, along with it, there became more damage in the woods. It was heavier equipment. It could take more things. It was taking longer wood. And the damage to the residual stand by skinning up trees, but also the rutting and the erosion and everything. And these original tractors, they didn't have any blades on them. What we know today is a bulldozer blade. So it was a long time in coming before they got that, where you could then construct a road, keep drainage in mind, make your water bars, and as we know them today, and everything like that. The other piece of equipment that was used a lot was the logging arch.
Yeah.
And again, to cut down on friction, and all that an arch was, and most of them I think were probably homemade, and they were all sizes and shapes, but it was basically two tires with an arch over the top of it, and a hollow space in underneath, and then a tongue where it could be hooked to the back of the tractor. And then a winch cable would go up over a set of fairleads, a set of rollers on top, and it'd be attached to the trees, and when it was raised up, the ends of those logs would be in the air. So it was much easier to drag, where it didn't have all the friction of diving into the ground. So there was quite a variety of those things. And when you were winching with them or on a sidling or turning, it was quite easy to tip them over, and many times I had to hook in a different place and tip it back upright to continue. The bulldozer blades were actually were predated by horses. There were horses that had blades in front of them. I don't know if they were around here or not, but it said that the Mormon teamsters working for contractors on the building of the Union Pacific Railroad bulldozed with blades pushed by horses.
Can't picture that.
No. But the first blades, they were a heavy blade, and they could not be angled or tilted. But then there came to what they called a trail builder blade. And that blade could be angled at 30 degrees, sometimes as much as 40 or 50 degrees, to the right or the left. And it was longer than the bulldozer and had greater curvature, but was not as high as the bulldozer blade. The trail builder was used on hillside cuts, shelving out the dirt and pushing it to the downhill side.
That was behind?
No, that was in front. And that was the first angular blade, and now is common, everybody has it. But, I remember a lot of equipment around here that if you wanted to angle your blade, there weren't hydraulic cylinders to do it. You got out old pins and...
Yep. That's where it stayed until you wanted to move it back to another direction.
Well, then the transportation of logs, they became going greater distances, and like we spoke about, that instead of the mills going to the logs started going to the mills. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of trucks that were designed for logging. That really was their main thing. It was a very, very heavy load, very poor roads, and the Kelly Springfield truck was one of the first ones. There was also one known as the Riker, the Knox, the White, which still exists today, GMC, Mack, Garford, which was more on the West Coast, an extremely heavy-duty truck, the FWD, four-wheel drive, which then had more traction, Kenworth, and International. And these started as early as 1912 or 13 or so. It wasn't until about 1920 that there were inflated tires. The braking system on the trucks were the old-fashioned mechanical brakes, they call them, which many of those were in operation until 1950 or so. Mm-hmm. And they didn't work very well. And they could fail, and there were a lot of accidents. And in Vermont there were many accidents. Long downhill grades, even when they went into hydraulic brakes, if a line broke, that's it. No brakes. I mean, there just was nothing. Whereas as the modern trucks today have the engine brake, the Jake brake, exhaust brake, different names for it, which has a characteristic sound that people hear when a truck is going down grade, and it just really reverses the compression of the engine to the other side of the piston and holds it back. The engine holds back the drivetrain rather than the friction of the brakes. And then your brakes are not heated up so that when you need them, they're there. Mm-hmm. And we call air brakes, and there's a compressor that builds the air for it. And if there is a little leak or something, that compressor's still constantly building air to be replenishing things. Where with hydraulic brakes, if you have a pinhole leak, when it leaks out, it's gone. There's nothing else to put it back in. And with the the trucks today, they have what's known as a spring brake that is in a canister, and when the truck is operating, there's air that's compressing that spring. And if you lose the air, that spring will put pressure onto the arms that work the brakes and will slow the truck greatly and can actually stop it and hold it. So there's so many safety factors built into things today.
That sounds better than a chain put underneath a sled runner.
Yeah. But what the first trucks around, there were no roads for them to operate on either, and they'd go across the little bridges or something, be a few plank, and it wasn't uncommon to have plank breaking and the whole bridge stringer breaking and all kinds of things, because they'd never transported weights like that in rural areas and things. The winter time was always a good time to be doing stuff. You got good roads in the winter time. You could smooth them out, take advantage of the frost.
Snow.
Yeah, build a snow road. And everyone always used to speak about snow roads. Well, in the past 15, 20 years, we really haven't had winters that would accommodate such a thing. But I've seen roads built where you could drive fully loaded trucks or equipment on top of 2 and 3 foot depth of snow, and it would hold you there.
It's like using gravel, only when the summer comes, the road disappears.
Yep.
She said something about rice chopper and eating place, so I guess this is it right here. Says we appreciate your business, Phil. 199 steak. Okay, we'll go. Let's see if we can find out what's going on in here. Here we go. Yeah, you can push me right in through there. I'll get out of your way here. Thank you.
That thing real?
Oh yeah, I'm real. Are you real?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. My name's Bruin.
Hey, good play, Brian.
He's Brian the Bear. I'm Bruin the Bear. This is the first time I've ever been in a grocery store, or whatever kind of store this is. Boy, everything is so strange in here. What are these things? What do we have here? Cannonballs? I wonder if there's anybody around here that could help me here. I just, what are they? And things that, looks like fruit to me, but I've never seen fruit like this before. Say, what are these things here anyway, huh? What are, they look like, I'm not quite too sure what they are. Let's see, what does the sign say? Canlappies. Because they look like they should be cannonballs or something like that. Oh, there's somebody. Hey, how are you?
They're cantaloupe. I'm good.
My name's Bruin, and I need some help here. You are?
I'm Rick.
Hey, Rick, how?
The produce manager here.
Oh, well, is that what I'm looking at? Produce?
Yep, sure is.
I never knew produce were round like that. No, I thought they were cannonballs, but you said they're can't what?
Cantaloupe.
Cantaloupe?
Yep.
Well, cantaloupe, isn't that what people do when they go to get married, they cantaloupe?
Well, it all depends what the honeydew says.
Oh, a honeydew. What's a honeydew? Yeah, I like honey. Do you have honey here in the produce section?
No, we don't have honey in the produce, but we've got some over by the bread.
Oh, well, I have another question. These things in these plastic or glass or whatever they are, what it looks like berries and all sorts of neat stuff.
Oh yeah, you'd love those.
If I do, I like berries.
You got raspberries and blueberries and strawberries, you'd love them.
Blueberries? Blueberries in those boxes and raspberries?
That's right.
I need about 2 dozen each of all of those, but how do you get those things from there to where I want to go to my den?
Well, you'd have to put them in your cart, I guess.
Oh, that's what I'm leaning on, my cart?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And then once I get them in my cart, what do I do?
Well, you have to go up front and run them through the register. They'll bag them up for you, and you can haul them off to your den.
I mean, they get another bag other than what they're already in? Oh, boy, I'm going to have a lot of good stuff here. And then I run them through the register? Can I walk through the register?
Sure.
Oh.
Or crawl, whatever the case may be.
Well, yeah, I do pretty good walking sometimes. But, well, I think I'll have some of those cantaloupe. Cantaloupe, right?
That's it.
Cantaloupe. The honeydew cantaloupe. Is that what they are? Honeydew cantaloupe?
We've got honeydew and cantaloupe. Two
okay.
separate melons for you.
Oh, okay. Well, some honeydew cantaloupe and blueberries and raspberries and blackberries. Oh, boy. This is going to be fun. I can see it now. I'm going to have a lot of good foods at my den. Yes, indeed. Hey, Rip, thanks very much.
You bet. You have a good sleep after you get back.
Oh, I think when I get back, I'm just going to eat. Thank you. Oh, let's see. What else do we have here? Boy, this is quite exciting. Boy, this beats going into the woods and digging for stuff, that's for sure. Wow, look at all of these. Look, those look like mushrooms. Are those mushrooms? Let's see. Well, they are. Those are the... Boy, like I said, this sure beats going into the woods, and I never knew there was a place like this. Wonder how many places like this are around. Oh, let's see. All sorts of good stuff. What do I have over here? Oh, looks like tomatoes and green things, and... Oh, boy. Are those cherries up there? No, I don't think they are. But all sorts of pretty stuff. Boy, this is a regular smorgasbord. I think that's what they call it. A smorgas something or other. Boy, look at this. I could just sit here all day. Wonder if they mind if I just hibernated here, and then when I was hungry, I came out and helped myself. I smell something. That smells something that smells like onions. I see lots of apples, though. I still smell onions. Look at all those apples and those pears. There's pears there. And what are these orange things here? They grow funny. Look at that. They grow they're all grown together and held together by this red vine. I don't know what that is. Well, I'll just keep on going. That's one of my, that's very rare. I don't find very many of those stalky things, those little miniature trees. I love those. Those are real tasty. Let's see what we have over here. Hey, look at all of this stuff. Boy, this is strange. What's that way over there? It looks familiar. Well, I have no idea what that is. Oh, there's somebody over there. Let's go ask him what that is. Oh, the light went out. Hi, how are you?
Good.
What's that you have in your hand?
I have chickens in my hands.
Chickens?
Yes.
Well, no, chickens have feathers. Those don't have any feathers.
Well, we take all the feathers off before we cook them.
Cook the chickens?
That's
Well,
right.
oh, what else do you cook here?
I'm sorry?
What else do you cook here?
We don't cook anything. Well, I'm sorry. We cook turkeys here, too.
Turkeys?
Yes.
Oh, some of my best friends are turkeys. Oh, what else do you cook here?
Oh, that's it. Just turkeys and chickens.
Oh, good. You don't cook bear here,
I don't
do you?
cook bears here.
Oh, good. A couple of places I went, they had bears too, and I have to go. Well, chickens, huh? And you take the feathers off before you cook them.
Yes, we do.
Hey, my name's Bruin.
Hello, I'm Mary Alice.
Hi, Mary Alice. Good talking with you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, you have some really nice stuff in there. Boy, look at all that. Thank you. See you later.
Bye.
Boy, I tell you, all this is, I just don't understand. Hey, I smell some other good stuff. What are these things? Little round saucer type things? Long things? Oh, I wonder where they keep the nuts. I wonder where they keep the grubs. Guess I just gotta keep looking around. Let's keep looking, I guess. Grubs? Grubs? Anybody see any grubs? Let's see. Oh, no grubs in there. There's nothing in there, as a matter of fact. Hey, there looks like there's Mother Merrick's friend. I wonder what she's doing here. Let's see what's down this aisle. What are those things? Oh, hey, those look like nuts. Are those nuts? I think it says nuts. I can read sometimes. What else do they have here? Those are the kind of nuts you give to an elephant. All sorts of goody things here, I can tell. Hey, there's something jerky in there, but it's not moving, so I guess it's not too jerky. Yep, those are the kind of things you can feed elephants. I'm not an elephant, I'm a bear. Oh, hey! I thought that was you over there, but I wasn't too sure. What are
Hey,
you doing
Merlin.
here? Hi, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good.
Well,
I'm getting ready to go to work here. What are you doing here?
you work here?
Yeah, I work here.
Well, how? Oh, well, you weren't here when I came in.
Probably not. I didn't see you.
Well, I was just walking down the road, and I saw this thing that said something chopper. And I went, chopper? I do chopping when I eat, so maybe they got something in here to eat. And boy, look at all this stuff.
You're a pretty smart bear.
Well, yeah, but you know, there's some stuff in here I have no idea what it is. Maybe you can help me out.
Oh, let's go.
No,
I'm sure I can.
Over here, I saw these round things, and they look like wheels, but I'm not too sure what they are. See, right ahead here? Those round things right there. Are those wheels?
This stuff here,
Yeah.
these are pies.
Pies? Like,
You know the honey that you eat all the time?
oh, yeah. Like my honey. Yeah.
Really sweet? Well, these pies are like your honey, sort of. Really sweet.
Ooh, are they honey pies?
No.
Somebody said something about honeydews and honey pies and cantaloupes, and I get all confused.
Honeydew, that's a type of melon.
That's what they said. It was a melon. But, you know, but this is like my honey, so I guess, you know, I never had a pie. Maybe I should get a pie to try.
Well, I don't know what kind you'd like. Here we have pumpkin.
Pumpkin? Wait a minute. Pumpkins don't look like that.
Well, they do after they've been cooked.
Boy, everybody cooks everything. The lady over there was cooking chickens without any feathers on them. But that's
Nobody eats anything raw.
What do you mean nobody eats anything raw? I eat all my stuff raw. What do you...
I know, but you're a bear.
Well, yeah. So?
I'm not a bear.
Oh, no, I know you're not. You're Mother Merrick's friend.
That's
Okay.
right.
You know, what are these little silly things in here? Like, look at all that stuff in there. What? It looks good, but I don't know. What is that?
Cheese.
Cheese what? Cheese, something, somebody around say something? Cheese. Cheese, I always say cheese when I don't know what to say.
I don't know. That's a good question. It's made out of milk.
Milk? That's milk?
In a various form.
Huh. Well, I guess I could try some cheese. Cheese whiz. I never see cheese whiz. I always see that a lot.
Let's get you some good old Vermont cheddar.
Vermont cheddar, yeah, that's because I'm a Vermont bear, so I need some Vermont cheddar, yeah.
There you go.
Okay. You know what? My keen nose, my sniffing nose tells me that there's a salmon around here, that there's some fish here. Do you know anything?
Fish? Yeah, there's
Is there a
fish.
stream here somewhere?
Yeah, hold on. No, we
there's
don't have any streams.
Well, if there's no stream, how can there be any fish? Boy, that fish smells real strong right here. Yeah, right here I smell salmon and all sorts of fish, but you know, I don't see anything. And you said there's no stream here, and if there's no stream, how can I be smelling fish?
Look at this. This is salmon.
That's not a salmon.
Sure it
Salmon
is.
have fins and salmon have heads. There's no head, there's no fins there. There's no water here. How can that be a salmon?
That's only a piece of a salmon, say.
A piece of a salmon?
Most humans can't eat a whole one like you.
Well, wait a minute, what'd you do? Turn them inside out? I've never seen a salmon look like that. Salmons have scales on them and all sorts of neat things. You turn them inside out. Oh, the poor salmon. How'd you do that?
just cut them up into a couple of pieces.
Cut them up into a couple of pieces? You mean you don't eat your salmon whole?
No.
Oh, you humans, I'm telling you, you don't know how to eat good things, I'm telling you. Well, I'll have some salmon.
It's really good.
Look, you know, I smell other things too, but I don't see anything I recognize. You guys, I don't know how you do that. What is that? What's in those little round things up there? Yeah. Now, you're gonna tell me that there's fish in there too, right?
Yep, there's fish in here too.
You know, fish.
Look, they're little small fish.
They don't come like that. They just swim in the water, and you don't find them in little things like that. What the?
Well, they added some other stuff, you know, like sour cream.
Oh, sour cream? That's like when milk goes bad, right? I like
Well,
sour
when you don't drink it, that's what happens. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I could try some of that too. Boy, I'm telling you, what a trip this is. Hi there, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm brewing and I'm trying to figure out what all this is all about.
And are you enjoying the trip here into Price Chopper so far?
Well, yes, I am, and I gotta tell you, I've never seen so much food in all my life. But you guys package it sort of different than what I'm used to it.
I can just imagine.
Yeah.
And do you enjoy tuna fish?
Tuna fish, yeah, I do.
Well, enjoy your trip here, and we're also hiring. So if you need a job, please come here, and we'll put you to work.
Oh, I could get a job here?
You sure can.
Oh, that. I'll have to talk with you about that later.
Okay.
Well,
nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
Enjoy your
also.
trip here.
Thank you. Bye. Well, this is a funny looking container in here. What is in there? They look like naked shrimp. Shrimp without their heads. Sort of. I wonder if they're related to the salmon that didn't have any heads or anything.
Well, sort of.
What are those? Oh, those shrimp? They smell like shrimp.
Yeah, they're shrimp. These are the ones that you see right in the ocean and stuff.
Ocean?
Yeah.
What's an ocean? I know what a stream is, but I don't know what an ocean is. Is that a large stream?
That's a really, 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 really big stream. And this,
Yeah. Can I wade in that stream?
well, I think it might be over your head, Bruin.
There's a lot of things that are over my head. The store is over my head. They got so many things here.
Well, look at-
Go ahead. What are these?
This is what shrimp look like after they've been cooked. They turn,
There you go with that cook again. Well, everything
They
in
turn
here is
orange.
cooked. Orange?
see,
Orange?
these are
Yeah.
brown,
That's the way I know
these are
shrimp.
orange.
Orange shrimp. I thought orange was a fruit.
Well, it's that too.
You color those shrimp? Just when you cook them, they turn that color?
Hey, Bruin, I think this is something we better pick up for you.
What's that? What are those? It smells good.
Crayfish.
Oh, I like crayfish. You're going to tell me they come out of an ocean too? No, crayfish come out of a stream.
No.
Oh. They come out of a stream. I know they come out of a stream. Looks like somebody wants to get by here.
Did you want some shrimp? So, let's
Boy, this is a busy place. Look at all these people around here. I'm telling you.
Daddy, look at that bear. Can I go look at the bear?
So how are you gonna eat those things? Just like that out of the container or what?
Right out of the container. There's some kids over there. Yeah, there's some kids over there. Hi there. Hi, how are you? Huh? How are you? Oh, my name's Bruin. What's your name? Huh?
Is that a bear?
I don't know.
Is it a real bear?
Well,
Betcha.
yeah, I'm a real bear. Are you a real kid? Huh? Yeah, I'm a real bear, too. So how you doing? Huh? You
What's the
find-
bear eat?
Kid.
Boy.
Well, I've been trying to find nuts and grubs and fish and all sorts of things, but you know what? You humans eat them different than I do. But I think I'm gonna like it the way you eat them too. Yeah. Well, I'll see you later. Have yourself a fun day. Bye.
Is that a bear?
Yeah. Is that a real bear one?
That's a real bear. Yeah, I am. See you later. Bye-bye. Well, let's see what else we have. We need to find those nuts and those grubs and everything. And honey. I need to find some honey too. The capacity of trucks, I remember
Howard Nichols in the 50s, 1950s. He had a pair of Ford trucks, and I think they were what's referred to as a 1.5 ton truck. They would have been just a dual wheel truck. That's the way they came from the factory. And the common thing then was to add a set of dollies behind it, and that was a separate axle. It did not drive, no traction from it, but it was capable of being raised up when not in use.
Save the tire wear, only with a load was it on the ground.
Well, that, but also, and then it let you get traction to get back to where you wanted to go.
Yeah. They were behind the traction, or behind the drive wheels.
And a common thing was that after you were unloaded, when you didn't have the pressure on the springs, you could pull out some pins that were inserted over the tops of the springs. And then you'd back into a bank or something, and it would raise it up, and there'd be a spring-loaded latch that would hook it, and there they'd be in the air. And then when you got around to load, you'd get in position and pull that lever out. They'd drop down, and you might have to put them in a little low spot where you could insert the pins for the springs, and then you could go and load. And today, the majority of the trucks you see, they have their own loader with them. It goes right along and has lights on it to do anything, anytime. Well, it wasn't easy like that back then at all. These logs had to get loaded somehow.
Somehow they had to get from the ground up onto a truck.
Yep, and that is definitely has gravity working against you. So there were many ways of doing that, and one of the things commonly referred to as cross-hauling, and I think that is anything to do with when you're taking a piece of wood, a log, and you are going sideways with it rather than with the length of it. I think that's really what the term means. But they could take alongside a wagon, a sled, or a truck even, and have the logs would be on the ground, and they'd have to come up some 2 or 3 feet in height or more. So a rope or cable would be attached to the truck or wagon, whatever, and a log was laid inside those ropes. The ropes were completely over the top of the load and were hooked to a horse, a tractor, or whatever. And as that was pulled, the slack coming out of the ropes would pick that log up and bring it up over and roll it onto the top of the load. And then it could be rolled around more against stakes or whatever. But
then the cable's still underneath that log.
No, not by the time it rolls on
Oh,
there.
that's right, yeah. You sure?
Yeah, it's hooked to a stake or the outside of what you're loading it on. And once it gets
This is a brake too, I hope.
once you get up to the top, as that is pulled, that log is here, and your rope is like this.
Yeah, you're right, yeah. It never goes on the truck, it starts at the side of it.
Correct.
And goes away from it, yeah, okay.
But I think the most common thing in this area was the skidway. And I remember times hunting and stuff, you'd see skidways everywhere you looked. And today, probably the majority of people out there, what's a skidway?
Well, we know where the name Skid Row came from, right? Meaning a shady bunch of bums and stuff, and that's the term they gave to where loggers lived, and at the end of the log drives and everything, when they came back into the cities, that was Skid Row and whatever.
Okay.
You know what I mean, right?
Well, yeah.
Did you know that?
No.
Oh, yeah, I heard that.
Well, the skidway was...
Loggers come a long way, haven't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, the skidway came about, again, to fight gravity. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Here you had this weight, and you had to get it up somehow. And the advantage of the terrain was used, which here in Vermont it's
Easy.
pretty easy to find one piece of land not far away that's higher than the piece of land you're on. So the roadway or wherever the truck or wagon was located would be a little lower elevation than this other piece of land. But the side of a truck or wagon or whatever it didn't meet with the ground very good, and you had to gain some height. And when you're rolling a log to load on a truck or something, you don't want it to fall very far. I mean, you're talking several thousand pounds quite often, and that can do quite a lot of damage. I've heard even of times loading trucks where they would roll something over, and it actually would tip the truck right over onto its side because they were loaded kind of lopsided to begin with. But the procedure there was to take and construct this relatively easy structure out of almost any old log that was handy, and by a little bit of notching to hold it together, and it was assembled where you then park your vehicle right alongside of it. And there usually were two different levels to it, and the logs themselves were stored on the uphill side of that, along the sides, and with the can hooks they could be rolled and turned and brought on. The rounder they were, the easier they went. When they had a little bit of a crook or a big flat spot, it was pretty brutal to roll them sometimes. But they'd start out rolling them in on one side at the lower level, and then after a certain point, maybe some planks would be used to raise it up a little bit. Then you'd go up to the upper level with some other planks, and eventually you'd have to put in the stakes on the side of your truck so that the last ones had to go over the top of everything. But we're talking about loads of maybe 1,200 to 1,500 feet as compared to today's loads that are probably on a straight truck triple.
Yeah.
So they were relatively smaller loads, and they weren't loaded as high. Many times two logs high was it. And the logs back then, many of them when they went to the local mills, as usually was the case, they weren't marketed in the manner they are today. And the local mill liked 8, 10s, and 12 footers. I don't think really looked for the long logs back then or much. So that was quite a change. And the trucks that Howard Nichols had, they were gas engine. It was not at all uncommon to smell brakes burning. I remember following trucks off Bromley Mountain a couple times, and the brakes caught on fire before they got to Manchester. So they had a pretty good bunch of flames coming out. It was a whole different thing. And these trucks were equivalent in horsepower to what today's pickups have. I mean, they didn't have many horsepower. None of those pieces of logging equipment today, what you think of as a 70 horsepower, 150 horsepower piece of equipment, were probably like 15 to 20% of that in horsepower. A lot of your farm tractors, for example, I think the John Deere A tractor, which was a real workhorse for many, many years, I think was 38 horsepower.
Yep.
So they were very, very low on horsepower. But
I remember my first Paul Chicote, who we used to work with, and when I was just starting out, I think he knew I didn't know much, so he was trying to educate me in a nice way. But he said, "Come to the sawmill with me one time." And remember his old reddish or orange truck with a white top and stuff, and it'd carry 1,500 feet or something.
Chevrolet Apache.
Yeah. And I can remember going down a hill and him applying the brakes, and that truck didn't want to stop. I mean, you could just feel this weight behind you, and it really, it makes you realize, don't pull out in front of a truck. You know, they say you don't try to stop a battleship or an aircraft carrier, you just turn off the engine and it just keeps coasting. And that's the way the truck was. That massive amount of weight for those days, just wanted to keep on moving. It was moving in that direction and it didn't want to stop. And it gave me that realization to respect any heavy truck. Don't pull out in front of it. It's hard to stop. And another thing on that same trip, we went to, I won't tell you what mill, and I watched the guy scale the logs and everything, and that was very interesting, and all I was doing observing, and I got a call a week later from Paul and saying, you got to come with me every time. He says, I've never had that much logs on the truck, that much volume of wood is when I was just standing there watching this guy scale, and he thought I was checking him or something. He said, it's the biggest load I ever had.
Well, Paul had a piece of equipment to load with eventually.
To get away from rolling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From the skidway, and that was a crane of some sort. It was mounted on an old army truck, I think, and was cables and tongs and stuff. And I remember Chris Sweezy having something similar to that, only his was mounted on tracks. And that's how Howard Nichols would load. He trucked a lot of things for Sweezy. And I can remember at 10, 12 years old going up and hooking tongs for Howard Nichols. And he'd swing the boom around with the empty tongs, and he'd point out what log he wanted, and I'd drag the tongs over and attach them somewhere near the middle of the log, but you never, by just 2 points, you never could hold the log flat. They'd always tilt one way. And then there was no way of rotating it like loaders are today. No, he'd swing it up over the truck, and he'd have to maybe bump it 2 or 3 times, get it spin the right way and get it where he wanted, and then all of a sudden drop it. And sometimes the tongs would come out of it, sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes I'd have to climb on the truck and knock them out, and then swing them over on the ground again and take another. But probably like 10 or 12 logs to a load, maybe, an average. It wasn't too much. But it was a lot more dangerous than today. I mean, you had these weights and everything.
You don't have
were
a
right
front
around.
grip on that log.
Yeah. And then the method of unloading. Everybody back then had what they called trip stakes, because when you got to the mill, there wasn't anybody to unload you. You had to unload yourself. And you had to get rid of those stakes that were holding the logs on the truck. But how did you do that? Well, it's what they call a trip stake. And the bottom section of most of these, some of the trip stakes, were metal, a metal stake pocket, and then the rest of it would use a good strong wooden stake. Hardack was a real favorite thing. And what held the bottom stake pocket on one side, it would sit vertically when it was in position. When it was tripped, it would be tipped actually, so it would be headed downhill. And when it was up in place, a chain or cable went around it, and at the end of that, it had quite a long oval link. This oval link went over a pin that had quite a curvature, kink in it, and this pin went back around so that it was parallel with the log bunk on the bottom, and a piece of pipe slid over that pin, and so that locked it in place. On the other side of the truck, there was usually a wire with a loop in it, a heavy steel bar hooked to that piece of pipe. And then when you got ready to dump your load, to unload, you took off your cables or straps that you had securing it. And then you had to trip the stakes. And you wanted to trip them both at the same time so that the load went right off nice and even.
Shakes the whole earth.
Yep. And you could take the log chains, and many times that's what it anchored your load anyway, and you